This happened last year at the peak of my partying stage. I was at a friend's house drinking, and at around 2 a.m., I was pretty drunk and decided to call an Uber to take me home. The car pulled up, and I have this habit of sitting at the front with the driver. He was a young man around mid to late 20s, and I don't remember too much about what we were talking about, but I do recall his compliments going from "you're really pretty" to "you're really hot." And he kept saying I reminded him of his mom. I found it really strange, especially considering I was 19, but I tried to laugh it off because I didn't want to appear rude. I asked him to swing by the drive-thru at a burger spot because I was hungry. We got the food and he was supposed to take me home, but I noticed he was driving literally the complete opposite way of where my house was. I looked at his map and it kept telling him to turn around, so I asked him where we were going, and I remember him looking over at me and saying, "Oh, you don't want to come over to my house?" I remember I completely sobered up and said, "No, please take me home." I don't recall if we continued talking after that, but luckily he took me home and I never heard from him again. I also reported him the next day. What really upsets me is that he clearly knew I was inebriated and tried to take advantage of me. I can't imagine what would have happened if I had never spoken up. It's safe to say that I won't be Ubering alone at night anymore. This happened about 6 months ago, and I recently took an Uber for the first time since this incident, so I thought I'd share. I was leaving a work function at a bar at around midnight in a large city about an hour away from the suburban home I share with my partner. For reference, I'm a woman in my mid-20s with an average build. Not tall, not strong, definitely not threatening in any way. And I was a bit buzzed that night. I'm talking like 3 drinks, so not incapacitated in the slightest. Anyway, I'd usually take a company car home, but I hadn't reserved one since I didn't know what time I'd be leaving, so I just decided to take an Uber. The company reimburses me for the bill anyway, so it was no difference to me. Once the Uber pulls up, I say goodbye to my colleagues and get in the back seat. I'm always very nice to my Uber driver, so I introduce myself. This driver, let's call him Ed, since I don't actually know his real name, seemed totally normal. No red flags, and we make pleasant conversation for about 15 minutes until we're squarely out of the city on the way to the suburbs. From this pleasant conversation, I learn he lives in a certain neighborhood not too far away from my home. Note that his neighborhood, while relatively nearby, would be completely out of the way on the route we are taking to my home. The conversation reaches its natural end, so I just stay a bit quiet and start looking at my phone, Reddit, whatever. The quiet is interrupted by his voice, suggesting that I take a nap if I feel tired. It didn't even strike me as weird at first, so I just thanked him for the offer, but that I wasn't that tired. He then said, "Oh, I always get sleepy when I'm drunk. Are you sure?" At this point, something in my body made me even more wide awake than before. So I told him, "No need to nap, I'll be home soon enough anyway." He drops it after that, but I still thought it was weird that he'd say that. About 5 minutes later, he says that the highway has some kind of weird construction going on and the single-lane traffic ahead would make my trip longer than it needs to be. He asks if it's okay to take another route. I oblige, already on edge and just wanting to be home. My partner calls at that very moment asking when I'll be home, and I make sure to make it very clear I was talking to my significant other. Something was weird about this guy, and I wanted him to know that someone is expecting me at a specific time and knows where I am. After I hang up the phone, the Uber driver stays quiet and we get off the highway, on a different exit than I've ever used, but I guess that's to be expected on a different route home. I'm bullshitting on my phone because I don't want to talk to this guy anymore, not even looking up until he says, "My house is only 5 minutes away from here." Okay, I've now got a pit in my stomach. I'm probably a good 25 minutes away from my house right now, a distance that was enlarged by a shortcut. I say some nonsense about how I like the neighborhood and how my boyfriend and I were thinking of moving here instead. Blah, blah, blah. Basically anything I can think of to make it seem like I don't think this is weird and I'm not picking up any signals. Surprisingly, he doesn't say anything in response and now starts driving on a road in a direction that I knew that led to my house. Phew, crisis averted, right? Except not really. There's 15 minutes to go and my surroundings are more familiar. Just as I'm starting to feel at more ease, he starts asking questions about my boyfriend. What does he do? How long have you guys been together? And other seemingly normal questions. Finally, with about 10 minutes to go, he asks if my boyfriend makes me happy. He does, very much, so I just gush a bit and say, yes, he makes me very happy. Then he asks if I make him happy. I thought that was weird, but humor is my defense mechanism, so I say, well, I should sure as hell hope so. We're now about 8 minutes away. He turns onto a side street and pulls over onto the side of the road, looks back at me over his headrest and asked me if I'd make him happy too. I said, what? Mostly because I can't even fathom what's happening. He asks again, do you want to make me happy tonight? I took a second to think through my options. I'm alone with this guy who's behind the wheel. The street is dark and I don't see any lights on in nearby houses. And I don't know what the hell the guy has in the car. I default to the response many women know to be the true barrier to men's advances. I don't think my boyfriend would like that very much. His weird, creepy grin falls away from his face and he says, he doesn't have to find out. Come on, make me happy. I know a few ways you can start. I tell him that my boyfriend is expecting me to be home at any minute and besides, I love him, I don't want to hurt him. Can you please just take me home already? I carry a small knife and a little canister of mace, but all I could think of was to appeal to this guy's sensitive side. Somehow it worked and he didn't say another word after that. He just turned back around and silently drove me home. Weirdly enough, I say thanks, I get out of the car, and that was that. I go into my house and start crying immediately for some reason as soon as I hug my partner. He tells me I need to contact Uber immediately and tell them what happened so that this guy doesn't try to take advantage of anyone else. I agree and I pull up the app to file the complaint. Except when I looked at my last ride, the picture in the profile was 100% not the same guy who drove me home. The car was the same, but not the driver. The guy in the photo was brown and wore a turban, maybe early 40s. The guy who drove me home was white and seemed just a bit older than me. Uber never followed up with me and just refunded my money. I did tell the police what happened because my partner insisted, but they didn't take me seriously since nothing actually happened. I was worried for a while since the guy knew where I lived, but apparently it's long forgotten since I just took an Uber today. Moral of the story? Always make sure the photo in your Uber driver's profile matches the person who's driving the car. This story starts on a Thursday night in May 2017. I work in retail and after a long shift one night, called an Uber home so I could avoid the dodgy people that hang around the train station. I wish I had known that this simple act of calling for transportation would lead to a 6-month-long ordeal of harassment and obsession. I got into the car and chatted with the middle-aged driver who I'll call T. He had a strong Turkish accent and seemed friendly. The conversation was normal at first, with him asking where I worked and why I was out so late and what I was studying for, etc. As the conversation progressed, he began to make comments that started to make me feel uncomfortable. He started to comment on how pretty I was and how young I looked and how he missed the times when he was young and he could get girls like me. He then put his hand on my knee and patted it affectionately and tried to push my hair out of my face. I was very aware that he was controlling a moving vehicle, so I just ignored him and prayed that we would get to our destination quicker. When he pulled up to our place, he noticed a car was in the driveway and immediately retracted his hand. He asked me if I wanted to go out for a coffee sometime. I politely declined and said that I had a partner. He told me he was a lucky man and that I could call him any time for a free ride. He then reached out and kissed my hand. I felt physically sick, but thanked him for the ride and got out as quickly as I could. As soon as I was inside, I told my boyfriend what happened, who encouraged me to report the driver. I was apprehensive at first as he knew my address, but eventually reported it as I knew we were moving soon. I was reassured by Uber that the matter would be investigated and received a full refund for the trip. I didn't hear anything from T after that and was soon busy into my study schedule, working and moving house. I had completely forgotten about him until around August, where by chance I ran into him in our cafe. I was in line to get a coffee when he tapped me on the shoulder. My heart sank. He gave me a big smile and tried to give me a hug, which I declined. "Hey, I've missed your pretty face. Where have you been?" "Oh, hey, I'm super busy, sorry. I can't really talk," I spluttered. I ordered my coffee hastily and burst out the door with him hot on my tail. He started walking beside me, matching my pace. I was starting to breathe heavily and hyperventilate. "Hey, so I could have bought you that coffee. We still need to go on that coffee date." I told him no, I was not interested, and he was making me uncomfortable. He then physically grabbed my hand as we were walking. I actually spluttered out, "What the fuck? What are you doing?" He then replied with, "Oh, was that too soon?" Too soon? Too soon for what? We're not on a date. I'm not interested. Please leave me the fuck alone." I said this loudly enough for people around me to hear me, and a few people had started to pay attention. "Oh, were you a lesbian or something?" "What? No, I'm just not interested in you." I was mortified. I had officially lost it and started to cry. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you," he said, and he tried to pat my back. I physically flinched and walked away from him, so close to having a mental breakdown. He called out behind me as I was leaving, "You still work at that generic shoe store, right?" I realized then I had told him where I worked that night and that he had picked me up and seen me in uniform. I had also told him where and what I studied. I couldn't believe my own stupidity. I alerted my store manager, who then alerted the shopping center security, who assured me that they would be on the lookout. Sure enough, my first night shift back after that cafe run-in, my manager told me that someone had come in asking for my phone number and when I was next on shift, claiming to be my boyfriend. My manager refused to give out this information and immediately notified the security, but by the time they arrived, he had already left. They showed me the grainy security footage of people coming into our store around that time, and sure enough, it was T. I was told that if he came in again, to hide out in the back and the other girls on shift would deal with them. A few months later, he tried to add me on Facebook. I immediately changed my name on Uber so I couldn't be identified anymore, and I blocked him. The most recent incident happened in September of last year. I was tidying the window display out the front of the store when I immediately felt like I was being watched. I looked to my left and sure enough, T was there. I pretended not to know him and said, "Can I help you, sir?" "Just admiring your beauty," he said with a smile. He then gave me an envelope and walked out before I could say anything. Inside was a card saying that he really felt a connection with me and thanking for my help today, and a voucher for the local bikini store for $100. I realize now is the time to involve the police, and I'm kicking myself for not contacting them in the first place. I haven't heard from him since, and I'm praying that I don't ever hear from him again. So the story is quite recent, near the end of last year. Now, this isn't a crazy story where I nearly get murdered or I meet face to face with the world's most known rapist. It's quite calm in comparison to what I've read on this page, but nevertheless, it's really creepy and shows just how dodgy Uber really is. Now, I still use Uber, yes, because it's 10 times easier than a bus. But I make sure to always sit in the back and always be alert. So I live in England, and during the winter the sun sets early. So I'm walking to the bus stop in my town center while it's quite dark. It's raining a lot, but I'm not letting it faze me because there isn't a point. I'm already wet. My buses are really unreliable. They either come really late or really early. I must have waited for 2 set times for the bus to come, and it still didn't. So I ended up just walking up to the end of my town and calling for an Uber. I did that to make the price of the Uber go down a bit. A life hack, if you will. So the guy comes and I hop in the front seat, and he seems like a really nice guy. He kind of looks like an Indian version of Clive Rowe. Straight off the top, this guy is being super nice, constantly smiling at me and chatting away about my day. I normally don't interact, but because he was trying his best, I gave it a chance and talked to him about my day and told him about my day at work. I was currently working in an IT-based job, so he found it interesting. One thing I found odd was that the guy would fully turn his head and chest to look at me when responding, even though he was driving. So it goes quiet for a little bit and he responds to a call on loudspeaker and is chatting away in his language. It was calm. He then starts telling me about his wife and his life back in his home country and all that good stuff. Again, I'm being nice and nodding along to be kind. Because of our talk about my job, he starts telling me about how he made money back in his country and it was something IT-based that he did at home. So he tells me at once, but then he tells me again in a slightly adapted story. And this happens all the way home for the rest of my journey, telling me the same story over and over. I'm constantly nodding and telling him I'll try it out soon. So we pull up outside my house and he turns to me again and starts telling me about the job, asking me if I'll try it out. I'm all like, yeah, I'll give it a look, even though I barely understood what he was telling me about. I go to hop out the door and say thanks, but the door is still locked. I'm making it very obvious I want to get out by pulling at the door. I still don't understand why Ubers lock their doors considering you pay through your phone anyway. Maybe it's just a safety thing, I don't know. So instead of unlocking the door, this guy starts telling me how to do the IT job, but this time he is patting and grabbing my thigh. Now, for someone I know, that could be a nice gesture, but for some random-ass Uber driver, that is far past creepy. I'm now pulling the door, assuring him I will check the job out. Before he unlocks the door, this guy says to me, "Will I see you again?" with some creepy-ass smile. I'm all like, yeah, maybe. Probably ended up giving this dude a hard-on at the idea of seeing me again. I luckily finally got out. So for that Uber driver that thinks it's okay to touch thighs and not let passengers out, I will definitely be denying your rides if you come up. This happened about a couple of weeks ago. I was going out to a concert with a friend but decided not to drink because I had early class the next day. I'm a university student in a town that is predominantly filled with university kids in school months, which is important to consider during this story. So because I don't have a car up at school with me, I decided to take an Uber to my friend's house to chill a bit before we leave together for the concert. The night goes as planned and her and I take a taxi back to her place. The next day I get a notification from Uber saying that I had to pay a cleaning fee because I had vomited inside of my Uber's car. At this point I'm pretty pissed because I know for a fact I didn't puke in this guy's car. Because first of all I was sober and second of all we chatted the entire time. So I think, great, this guy's going to try and scam me out of $80 because he knows it's my word against his because I was the only one in the car with them. I respond to Uber saying that this is a lie and they send me pictures of the car with puke in it. These pictures must have been ones he saved from a previous time and decided to use it against me to strengthen his lie. At this point I freak out on Uber saying that this guy was lying and that he was trying to take advantage of the situation because it was only me in the car. To my surprise, after about an hour of going back and forth with them, they refund me the $80. I think, great, this is over with and now I don't have to worry about it anymore. Wrong. The day following this, I get a message from my Uber driver saying that I left all my IDs in his car and that he would meet with me to return it to me. This guy was so full of it because I had my ID in my hand as I read his message. I told him this and he said, "No, I have it here. If you want it, I'll give it to the police." At this point, I stopped responding to him because it was getting a bit weird. I don't get why this guy wanted to keep playing games with me. And side note, I have a really unique name. And there's no way that another person with the same name had ridden in his Uber that night. So slim chance he was being honest. So I go to sleep that night and wake up in the morning with a voicemail from an unknown caller claiming that he is a policeman from the police station and they have my ID. I call back the city's local police station and don't get an answer. Supposedly it's hard to get through with non-urgent requests. But regardless, I doubt the police station actually called me because it was impossible for them to have my ID. Plus, there's no phone number on my ID. I live in Canada, so I'm not sure how different an American ID would be. But anyways, I'm pretty confident that someone posed as the police, Perhaps it was my Uber driver, but I'm not sure. Anyways, about 2 days after the voicemail, my roommate is in the upstairs washroom of our house that overlooks the patio to the front door. By chance, she looks out the window and sees a guy standing on the porch facing away from the door with his hood on, just standing there. She's like, what the fuck, and watches him for about 10 minutes as she's getting ready in the washroom. 10 minutes is a long time to be standing outside the door to someone's house for no reason. It's also important to note that you have to mean to walk up to our door. It's not like it's close to the street or anything like that where someone might be standing there by chance. After 5 minutes, she goes downstairs and opens the door, expecting to see this guy to ask him what he wants, but no one's there. So this guy just stood outside our door for however long, since who knows how long he was there before she saw him, and left without ringing the doorbell or knocking. The next couple of weeks are also weird because we have had a lot of occurrences where the doorbell will ring but no one is there when we open the door. I got really weirded out by all of this and thought it had to be connected because it all happened in such a short time span. I deleted my Uber app and any app that tracked my location. The thing that also freaks me out is that the Uber driver knows where I live since he picked me up at my house. I'm pretty uneasy about this now and find myself looking over my shoulder more than usual. I hope that I never see this Uber guy again, and from now on I'm probably just gonna stick to taxis. This happened about a year ago. I was visiting friends in the city, about an hour train ride from where I lived. It was getting late and the last train was going to leave in less than an hour. My friends lived about 10 minutes away from the train station by car, so I let them know I'd need a ride soon. My friend who offered to drive me earlier that day was too drunk, so he ordered an Uber to come get me. Normally I would just stay the night, but I was pregnant in my first trimester and I just needed the comfort of my boyfriend's bed. We had some time, so as he's ordering the first one, he sees the picture of the driver and cancels it because the man looked creepy. The second one didn't look much better, but at least he seemed less creepy than the first. Which is ironic. He arrived shortly after. I get in the car and he says my friend's name, who is a man, and I tell him he just paid for it, but that he has the right person. He asks my name and if my friend is my boyfriend. I tell him my first name and then no, my friend isn't my boyfriend. He then compliments me and I thank him and try to put in headphones, but he continues to talk to me about how I deserve a boyfriend or something along those lines. Now I must say I know the city very well. I've lived there before and I spent a lot of time there. I know exactly how to get to the train station and I always know the best route based on the time. It's pretty late on a weekday, so there wasn't any traffic and pretty much any way he took in the right direction would get me there. He puts the directions in his GPS that's propped up on his dash. It tells him to make a left at the next street, which is what you'd have to do to get there since it's a dead end. We start moving and he suddenly asks, "Do cops hang out there?" I feel uncomfortable, but I figure he just wants to speed a little, so I say, "Not really." And he suddenly takes a right into a narrow alley before the left ahead. His GPS is telling him to turn around, but he's still heading in the opposite direction. So I tell him this isn't the right way, and he suddenly starts listening to his GPS like it was just a mistake. So he says, "I'll get you there if you don't mind me speeding." I'm thinking, what the fuck ever, just get me to my train, so I say, "Sure." And he immediately slams his foot onto the pedal and reaches 50 to 60 miles per hour before slamming on his brakes at the stop sign ahead. He continues to do this while following the directions for 2 blocks when he blatantly ignores the GPS and starts to head in the opposite direction yet again. At this point, I'm fully aware he doesn't intend to take me to my train, and I'm texting my friends telling them the situation. They tell me to come back, but I'm in desperate need of my comfort, so I try again and I say, "I'm going to be late for my train, this isn't the right way." He tells me I won't be late for my train even though he has no idea when it's coming. We go through a light and there's a new Camaro behind us, and he starts asking why the cops are following him. I didn't say anything, but he keeps asking me and gets louder and louder every time I don't answer, in between him mumbling to himself. Eventually the cop car turns and he calms down and I notice the time. 15 minutes passed at this point and I wasn't even a mile away from my friend's house, and I'm definitely not going to make this train. I tell him to take me back, but he insists that I'll make my train. I was really fed up and got pissy with him about the time and told him he had to take me back. He finally obliged, but only after slowing down next to a bus stop where a girl was standing by herself. He probably noticed my phone buzzing and lighting up, so he finally and calmly took me back to my friend's house. My friends were standing at the door when I got out of the car, so I walked up to the door. When I looked back to see him, I saw that he stopped his car down the street talking to a hooded person standing on the sidewalk. My guess is he probably thought I was a tourist and he could take advantage of me. So I reported it to Uber and the local Uber drivers page in the city, and I hope this never happens to anyone else again. So I drive for Uber, and believe it or not, I don't have too many weird experiences. Or maybe I'm just used to them by now. But Judy, well, she's a whole different ball game. So it all started when I picked this lady up on a Sunday. I don't work on many Sundays, but every single Sunday I work is super weird. There is just something about Sundays. So I picked this lady up in the sticks at some elderly care center type place. Even though this lady came up to my car with a walker, I could tell she was full of energy. She was super friendly, had bright pink lipstick on, and was full of pep. She climbed in the front seat and told me I was taking her to Catholic Mass. Her story from there got weirder. She tells me that she's not Catholic, but she wandered into a Hispanic Catholic prayer meeting one day when looking for a place to pray for herself. She told me that though she doesn't understand a word, she now goes to the Hispanic Catholic Church services when she can. She also tells me that she's a breast cancer survivor. She has one estranged daughter, she used to be a counselor, and a dog and a horse trainer, that she's a world traveler and that her heart is failing her and that her husband of 30 plus years is cheating on her and stalking her. I'm sitting here thinking, wow, this is the craziest life. Is this lady telling the truth? I mean, truth can be stranger than fiction. The best way I can describe it is her stories sound crazy, but she seems rather normal in conversation. So I pull up to the church and drop her off. I get out of the car to get her walker all set up, and she comes up and grabs onto me, hugging me tight. She asks for prayer and she begs me to tell her something troubling me so she can pray for me. She then tells me she thinks it's divine intervention that we met and asked for my phone number so we can meet again. I'm also a photographer, and she was wanting to get some pictures of her and her dog out at her property that she says she lived at her whole life, prior to having heart surgery and having to be at this elderly rehab place. She had also told me that her ex-husband had tricked her to signing away the house while she was heavily medicated in the hospital, but that the house wasn't sold yet and we could meet there for a photo shoot in a few weeks. So a week or so goes by and she calls me. She says she got a ride to the property and wants me to come meet her to look over at the place and get ideas for photos. I agree and drive even further into the sticks to get to her house. Let me tell you, this place was in BFE. You had to take an unmarked road to get to an unmarked road to get to another unmarked road, etc. And her house was literally in the middle of the woods. If you didn't know this house was there, you would not stumble upon it randomly. I should add that I took a wrong turn while trying to get to her house and ended up getting my car stuck on this dirt road that was super steep. I got stuck between these trees and thought there was no way I was going to get out. Judy came down the road in her walker and yelled out directions until I finally freed myself. So I get out of the car and look around at this property. It's breathtaking. She has a wooden gazebo that she and her husband built, and that when she was a counselor she did her sessions out there. And her backyard is literally the forest. She tells me to look around for about 20 minutes or so while she washes her hair in the trailer she was staying in on the property. She told me due to complications she can't be in the house. Before I go off to explore, she tells me about her crazed ex-husband. She said he had been stealing her mail and that he would send people to drive by her house slowly and watch her. That he had cut her fence and let her horses out, and that he had recently poisoned 2 of her dogs. I still wasn't sure if this was the case, but I asked her if she called the cops. She said yes, but that it was complicated. She told me the police did give her a new phone and that he wouldn't be able to get her new number. Oh yeah, she also told me that he's a computer whiz and that he kept breaking into her computer and all that jazz. So by this point, I'm thinking Judy has some issues. Nevertheless, why pass up an opportunity to explore this beautiful area and keep this lady company? So with the thought in my mind that Judy was crazy, I went back into the woods behind her house and began exploring. First, I came to this little shack. Curious, I looked inside and found these jars full of what looked to be science experiments. I'm not sure what they were, and later when I asked Judy about them, she said, "I'll tell you someday, dear." Not too long after, I made my way up to the side of a hill and into a clearing where I saw a bunch of trees that had recently been cut down. Judy said that the Forest Service had been out there getting rid of some of the nature, so I didn't find it too odd. However, I then stumble upon these two piles of sticks that are smoking. I uncover what looks like to be two campfires that have been recently put out, and it looked to me like someone was trying to cover evidence of them being there. I rather quickly go back to Judy's house and tell her of my findings. She immediately said, "Oh no, he's been camping out again watching what I do," followed by, "Don't worry, he wouldn't kill you, only me." I asked her if it could be a fire from the Forestry Service, but as we both thought about it, we figured they wouldn't leave it smoking, and not at 7:30 p.m. on a Saturday. Right about then, as we're getting into the car, this burgundy pickup pulls up across the road from us and stops. This guy seems to be watching us. Judy tells me not to look panicked, but to get in the car quickly. In an effort to see if this guy is honestly lurking, I start talking loudly about him and pointing in his direction. He sees me and peels out of there fast. And this was an unstable dirt road, not one you peel down. Judy tells me that she's sure that's one of the ones who's been sent there by her husband to watch her. We load her walker and show her dog into the car and head for the church. She gets out and goes to deliver something. Meanwhile, I'm sitting in my car with her dog. About 20 minutes later, I realize she's freaking attending Catholic Mass. I had to go get her and make her get back in the car. So we get to the care center and I help her inside. The night shift guy is there and he seems a little off himself. I look around and there are pictures of creepy dolls on the wall and old wallpaper. He asked her where she'd gone and she said we were at my house. To which he replied, "You went to the property? We'll talk after she leaves." She then replies, "I don't care, I can do it if I want." They already know what I'm doing. I don't have secrets, you know what's going on. I quickly excuse myself with the promise of calling again. We've texted a bit over the recent months, and as of now, Judy is moving out of her care home and into her own apartment. We're supposed to get together in a few weeks, and as long as we're not tromping through the woods, I think we'll be okay. To this day, I don't in God's name know what was going on, and I'm not sure if I want to. I'm probably going to call the care facility at some point and see if they can give me any clues as to who this person is I've been hanging out with. Whoever it was that was watching us, and whoever was in the woods, and whoever owns those jars. I really hope I never meet or see any of you ever again.